I would like to welcome everyone to DIMH, a session with Vanessa Pegueros, a Chief Trust and Security Officer at OneLogin. Vanessa brings over 2 decades of technology expertise to OneLogin, and I would love, in your own words, Vanessa, if you could summarize your career path a bit more for us and share this with our audience.
Yeah, sure, Becky. I'm glad to be here. And let's see, summarize a 30 plus year career. I will try and do that. But it's easy to say I've been in technology all of those 30 years. So working with various companies. I think I'm up to 12 companies now in my career that I've worked with
Wow.
in all kinds of different verticals, telecommunication, financial services, e-commerce, SaaS, and now OneLogin is an identity and access management solution. I've had a variety of roles all the way from running network planning and architecture for advanced wireless solutions, like the telecom wireless stuff. I've actually been a part of a sales team where I was a system engineer designing solutions for customers. Um, and in the last 18 years, I've been a security leader and working at various companies. I was the CISO for Expedia, also had a senior role at US Bank, and CISO for DocuSign, and now Chief Trust and Security Officer here at OneLogin. So that's kind of a high level overview.
That was an excellent overview. So yeah, the first question really that I want to ask, and what we're trying to do in my conference is to capture many different human factor perspectives related to cybersecurity and breaches. And so your role will be very important in trying to understand that. And we've come at it from other perspectives, like from the victim's perspective, from victim support coordination perspective, from an ethical hacker lens, even whistleblowing and etc. But I would love to know, in your own words, if you could tell us about your experiences with data breaches and any security incidents that have gone public. How did you handle that? How did it impact yourself, your organization? And then just more broadly, how do you think it could impact other CISOs, other security leaders?
Yeah, so I would say in my 18-year career, I've been involved in many, many security incidents, but I'd say that three of them, there were three big incidents that come to mind. And the first one was when I was at a financial services company, and they were related to the DDoS attacks that were happening to a lot of financial service companies at that time. And DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attacks. And it essentially is an attack where, attackers will flood like they'll try and log into a particular website to the point where the system just crashes. They'll do an automated, that's an example of something. Um, and so, my very first, I'd say, big security incident, it immediately has for me, what I realized was my own personal impact initially. So being a leader, feeling the level of stress that you feel pretty instantaneously when you hear the word, breach, and it's a big one. Your own body begins to feel like a lot of contraction, and you feel your heart rate goes up. And for me, I think that I do very well with stress. Not everybody does. So
Yeah.
you see the team around you and having various reactions. Some people verbally showing their stress, whether they're talking super fast, or they might even start yelling at somebody else, or there are some people you see go completely quiet, like they can't even say anything. And it's this interesting, like, a fight, flight, or freeze response that people
Yes.
get when a critical incident occurs. And so I do know in my own self, I think every security leader, CISO, has to know how they respond in these critical situations, because how
Yeah.
you respond will impact the rest of your team, and will impact the organization's ability to deal with the incident in a productive and efficient way. So I think it's super important. The incidents I've been through, I've gotten to know myself, but also it's also you get to know the people around you. And
Mm,
what's good is you, as you experience these little incidents, you do learn about people in your organization who handle it, even the little incidents, way better than other people. And it has nothing to do with title or
mm,
even sometimes role in the organization. Sometimes you'll be surprised there might be somebody in customer service who's incredibly calm during the process and
yeah,
talks to customers in a very calm manner. And you're like, wow, that person's an incredible asset in a future incident. So
wow.
whereas somebody who might be ahead of a security function is freaking out and yelling at people, and it's like, wow, they can't handle the stress. So not everybody is equally equipped. And to some extent, I'm not sure if you can learn that.
Mm,
I'm not convinced yet that you can learn it. Now, what does help is that you could do things like tabletop exercises that will prepare you and run you through scenarios, which help you deal with that potential scenario. And I think by going over something and what could happen, you tend to mitigate the stress when it actually does happen. It doesn't mean there won't be stress. So
mm.
I think practice and kind of experiencing the situation however you can, it definitely helps with your ability to respond effectively.
That's fascinating from a psychological perspective. And we have a term stress inoculation. So this sort of mild exposure to something. I don't know in your world, but would there ever be mock scenarios where there is some sense of breach in a mock
Yeah,
setting? Or is
yeah,
that, oh, okay,
yeah, we
okay.
do that. We do that quite often. We call them tabletop exercises,
That's what
which
that is. Okay.
yes, yes, yeah. So yeah, definitely to clarify that, what you do is you create a scenario, you create injects of different things that happen during that scenario. They will pull people in, like different things that happen that all of a sudden we have to call the chief legal counsel. That then they get brought in, and then we like kind of walk through the whole scenario, and then we do a lessons learned after the scenario to help people to for us all to understand where we have gaps, where we need to improve, where information was not available, where roles and responsibilities weren't clear. So we try and work all of that out. Um, the whole thing is like, let's capture the low hanging fruit in terms of where we're not prepared. Doesn't
Mhm.
mean we'll ever truly capture how the actual incident happens. We won't, but
Yeah.
by at least covering this, you get people into I call it building their muscle memory around how to deal with these incidents. And so it's super important. The other thing we do is we do engage outside firms to come in and do ethical hacking type exercises, and we don't always tell the organization that it's happening. So then we are essentially, there's a subset of people who know about it, but essentially you're actually having a real life ethical hacker in there who is actually doing things. And then when people in your company or the individuals catch it, they do have that adrenaline rush because they think it's a real incident. And so we let them go a tiny bit, and then we tell them it's not a real incident. Like you really don't like want to stress people out that much, and then they're
Yeah.
dropping everything and you disrupt business. So we do those two kinds of exercises to really help, like you inoculate around the stress. It's like building up your antibodies around a real crisis situation. So
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, you want to disrupt it slightly, but not to the extent where you accidentally contact a individual person or like a vulnerable customer or something like that. You need to
yeah.
make sure you've got it all contained. No, that was really interesting. Thank you. So switching gears a little bit here, I was reading up and watching some videos just in preparation for this, and you mentioned it was really interesting. You mentioned phishing is going to be potentially increasingly exploited or sophisticated in the way it goes about happening. And the example that you gave was, you said embedded video or voice message that might sound like your boss or your boss's boss. So I just wondered if you could elaborate on that example. It's a great example, and just share many, other insights, or what this might look like in a bit more detail in the future, just to speculate.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say exactly, when something like this will
Of
happen.
course, of course.
But I do think as we advance our capabilities around artificial intelligence, and you already see it in like deep fake videos today,
Mm-hmm.
where the videos are being altered to have the persons appear to say something they actually didn't say. I think the sophistication around that type of manipulation is going to grow significantly with these advanced technologies. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be a really tough environment to figure out what's real and what's not real. And so that that is a challenge. I think as these technologies advance, it's just going to be a continuing challenge to really the I'll call them the black hat hackers, and their advancement in their own techniques and the technologies they use will continue to grow. Technology doesn't have any kind of allegiance. It's going to be used by good people and bad people, and everybody in between. So we are just going to continue to have to be diligent around uh, keeping pace with the sophistication of the attacks, equipping our own employees with the skill sets they need to be able to combat, and then staying really engaged with the vendors that we use, the tools that we use to combat these attacks, and making sure that their roadmaps are anticipating the evolution of these technologies and how they'll impact the threat environment. So all that, it's there's not just one way to deal with this. It's a kind of a multifaceted approach to being able to defend yourself in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with real time video manipulation and that sort of thing. That is extremely sophisticated. Um, Now, I also read a commentary that you wrote for Dark Reading, and this was, I think, in June, early June, or about a month ago. And you stated that it's so important that a CISO has a direct and unfiltered line of communication to the CEO, so that politics are left outside decisions that need to be made purely with risk prevention in mind. So I thought that was a really interesting and great point. And I just wondered if, in addition to that, you had any other points, and what you think the role of the CISO and other security roles, how it will evolve in the future. And just, is it the case where it's sort of firefighting in isolation as a stereotype potentially, and how to move away from that?
Yeah, so I do think the role of the CISO, the head of security, whatever, chief trust and security officer, whatever that title might be. I mean,
Yeah.
part of that's evolving too. What is the title?
Yes.
But I think that it's becoming more of a business leader role, and versus I think I've mentioned in previous articles and things I've talked about. Traditionally the CISO has been like, oh, this is an IT leader only. Like somehow IT is compartmentalized and doesn't impact the rest of the business. Well, I
Mhm.
know that's no longer true. Every
Yeah.
company is a technology company, and technology is pervasive across every aspect of the business. So um, I think that the head of security, the CISO, has to be a business leader now. They have to truly understand every aspect of the business. They have to
Mhm.
understand the business processes. They have to understand what SaaS providers and cloud providers the business is using. There's no such
Mhm.
thing as people used to like to compartmentalize and say shadow IT. It's not
Mhm.
shadow IT. It is how business is done today. Marketing teams engage SaaS providers, and HR companies engage SaaS providers and use clouds. It's everybody is in the organization is leveraging this. This is just the way business is done. So to me, the typical CIO has, and more traditional CIO, it has not really fully embraced this transformation. They have
Right.
tried to fight it, and say it was, we need to stop it. We need to figure out how to stop it. And I think security people have always been of the, and this even goes 10 years back, but in my experience, security people is like, we're not going to stop it, but let's figure out how to secure it. And I think that is the approach that security leaders bring to the business, is like, we know we can't stop it, but let's minimize the risk. Let's figure out the optimal solution for the business. And so I think security leaders are truly stepping into being true risk management leaders
Mm,
in the organizations.
yeah.
And they realize that technology is going to continue to evolve and is going to continue to be implemented, and that there is no way to stop that. So they are very good at understanding new technology and understanding what the organization needs to do to minimize the risk around that new technology. And I think that is going to become more and more appreciated by business leaders, and they're going to start bringing the CISO in to
Mm,
conversations at a business and a strategic level,
yeah.
much more than they did in the past. And I also think, when I think about something good about how we're structured at OneLogin, I have the IT team reporting to me,
Hmm.
um, which is a flip of kind of how it traditionally has been structured. Um, but I do see the benefits of that, in the sense of, I fully realize we have to enable the organization, but we have to enable the organization in a secure way. And I think
Yes.
that's the part that has been left out with traditionally with CIOs, is they've been pushed so hard to focus on enabling the business, and at what cost? At what cost is the question. So, security
Yes.
in many situations was put, as a secondary priority. And I just feel like, when you have the organizational structure right, and when you have the priorities right, um, it isn't. It's a matter of talking about risk management, not what's more important than the other. Like, let's talk about managing the risk in this organization.
That's really amazing to hear. From a digital mental health perspective, what we're trying to do is prioritize across providers to work together to set standards, whether that be creating breach response victim support standards or all kinds of different things, how to monitor and measure clinical outcome responses and things like that. So yeah, that's really good to hear. And on the note of mental health and just thinking about monitoring and user permissions, who can access what within a company. I was reading something by the Open Data Institute here in London, and they were talking about this term I had never heard before called privilege creep. And what they mean by this, I'll just use their words, when too many people have privileged access to specific apps and systems, and it can cause problems. So from a mental health perspective, it could easily become life-threatening if there's real-time behavioral monitoring that's tracking an extremely vulnerable individual. And we do have a vignette about this in our conference on the 5th of August, 10 to 11, called whistleblowing and data cover-ups. But according to IT Pro Portal, yeah, just these difficulties of keeping tabs on who has privileged access to specific systems, this can create risks to, from data breach perspectives. So they had this idea of model of least privilege and just providing only the necessary permissions for a fixed period of time. I think this is going to be extremely important in mental health because we work with many different services, whether it be police, whether it be NHS or healthcare. It's just so multifaceted how many people could, in theory, have access to this information. So just generally, I wanted to know what your thoughts were around this, and what makes this privilege creep so dangerous, and why is it so important to set these levels of privilege to accessing the data so important?
Yeah, so it's a principle of security called principle of least privilege. It's
Mhm.
been around for as long as I've been involved in security, so well over 18 years, probably way longer than that. Um, it is very challenging, though, in practice to implement. And the reason it's challenging is because I think about an organization as like, it's just like an organism. It's a living organism where people, are the individual cells of that organism. And so you essentially, as the organism is small, the cells do a lot more work. One individual will do multiple functions when the organization is very small. They need a lot of access to different systems that, in order to do their job. And so it's nearly impossible to say, well, no, Becky, you can't have access to that. And you're like, well, I need that to do my job. So then we give you access. As the organization gets bigger, it starts to specialize, just like any organism would. So now Becky only is doing a subset of what she used to do, and she's doing more volume around it, but she's doing a subset. So now you no longer need access to all those other systems you used to have access to, because you no longer, that's not part of your job anymore. But the challenge is that as this company is growing and getting bigger, nobody bothers to go clean up that access. So you continue to keep your access, um, through like the life of your time at that company. Well, guess what? You get really innovative, and you're like, wow, I could use, even though this isn't directly related to my job, I can go use this information from this system that I have access to do this, that will then make this happen. So then you become, even though technically your job is not needing access to that other system, you've developed this cool, innovative thing that you do in your job that now makes you more efficient, and you now need access to that other system. So what I'm trying to say is it's a moving target. The access that
Mhm.
it is a moving target for people. And the challenge of combining both the innovativeness of the individual and what they're doing in their job with the growth of the company makes it very difficult to say that, Becky, you only need access to these two systems. It's in it. And so when you try and implement projects that will reduce your access, because in the end, we don't want you to have a bunch of access, because that just makes you that much more vulnerable, and the company that much more vulnerable to an attack. Because if a particular attacker is trying to get access to a system that you have access to, they might target you to get into that system. So you become the vector by which they get to that system. Well, if
Yep.
you have everybody in the organization who has access to that system, then pretty much they can target anybody they want in the organization, and use them as a vector. Whereas if you strictly, lock it down and don't have people having as much access, maybe there's only 4 people now that have access to that system. Now that attacker has to target those 4 people to get in,
Yep.
which makes it a lot more difficult for them. So access management is critical to controlling the risk within your company, but it's very difficult to implement in reality, or because of the business, how the business
Mhm.
operates. So it continues to be a challenge, and so I think the best thing you can do is have a clear inventory of all your systems, and what they are, and your most and define your most critical systems, your most critical applications. Understand very clearly who has access to those most critical systems.
Mhm.
And then, if you can't, the step of telling people you no longer have access is difficult, can be very difficult. But you can implement things such as single sign-on, or multiple factor authentic MFA, multi-factor authentication. You can implement things that make it difficult, but if a hacker actually did compromise you and you had access to that system, they would not be able to get in as easily.
Mhm.
Again, hackers figure out creative ways to bypass things sometimes. So there's nothing 100%, but this is not about 100% risk reduction. This is about risk reduction.
Yeah.
So there will always be risk in a business. But I think those are some things around access management you could definitely do.
Amazing, thank you. And that kind of segues really nicely into my next point about ethics and data minimization, and that sort of thing. So I'm writing a book on digital ethics and global mental health, and just moving into the cybersecurity space, I immediately envision all these potential scenarios that could happen if we don't just see that far into the future, or have the skill set that is not only kind of tech friendly and excited and all that kind of stuff, but to have this kind of the gas and the brakes really. So I just think it's really benefited me understanding ethics when I build stuff and when I analyze data. So I just wonder in this space, the cyberspace, is there any kind of ethical training, or there? You sort of touched on risk mitigation, but just how can people get sort of like the real life possible implications, or looking to the future risks that that could be incorporated? So how does ethics fit into that picture in your work?
Yeah, I mean, ethics, I mean, from when I first graduated as an engineer way back when, I had a clear ethical kind of component around what I would and wouldn't do with my knowledge. I wouldn't, I literally, in a very tough job market at that time, I had made a decision I wouldn't work with certain types of companies because I didn't want to use my knowledge in that way. And
Mhm,
I think every individual, every technical person, every developer needs to assess that for themselves. What are they going to use their knowledge for?
mhm,
And I think that's personal, and I think that there should be mandated courses in undergraduate programs for both developers and engineers around and computer anybody involved in technology, AI, data science. There should be ethical mandated courses around this, at least to get people to think about it. Secondarily, I think that companies need to do a much better job at privacy and what they do with people's data.
mhm,
I think we need, in my personal opinion, we need to model, not OneLogin's opinion, my personal opinion is
mhm,
we need to model the GDPR and how data is treated in the EU. And I think that will definitely impact business models in the US and what companies, especially marketing related companies, are doing with
mhm,
people's data. But to
mhm,
me, I don't, I see it as wrong that companies are financially benefiting from the use of what I call free raw materials in people's data and turning that into, billion-dollar businesses, and
mhm,
the raw material is free. And like, so I do think the ethical challenges around privacy um, are going to increase and be significant in the future in the US. I think they should be.
yeah.
And I also think that developers should be mandated to take security classes and pass a security type certification so that they can actually develop secure applications in the future, and that be part of their profession to be a developer. And
Mhm,
today that is not true as well. So I do think ethics is a personal thing, but I also think that individual companies have obligations to consider what they're developing and how that will be used in society. I think it's the board should be questioning that from a ESG perspective. They should be questioning decisions, the use of AI, how AI is used, those types of things. So it's a kind of a multifaceted approach around ethics.
yeah, and a switch in culture to think that ethics is adding value. It's not just a barrier. The way I see it is that if you don't need the data, don't ask for it. You can still achieve your outcome. So that was really, really interesting. And so I suppose just sort of wrapping things up, and just to thank you very much for answering all the questions. And I just wondered if there was anything that you wanted to mention that's on your mind.
No, I just think that, and I've written about this, that the volume of cyber breaches that are occurring and ransomware attacks, and I think that especially ransomware, it leverages the psychology of human beings so much, and I think
Yes.
that this is creating long term. It's creating trauma in our society around uh, their digital experiences, their trust of using digital platforms.
Yes.
And I do think that you need more companies need to step up and place a priority on security across the board. I don't think it's I really don't think it's acceptable to say, oh, well, my cyber insurance will pay for it. I don't have to worry about it as much. So I really hope that all companies step up and start to do more around security. I get it's not their core competency, but you need to leverage your partners, your vendors to do what's right. And you need to do what's right for your customers, which is protect their data, protect what they've entrusted with you. And that's not going to go away. So companies need to start working this into their financial plans. They need to start realizing that this is a cost of doing business in this digital world, and they can't look for somebody else to do it for them. They have to take that responsibility on themselves.
That's a really positive, empowering note to end on, because we're trying to build a global cybersecurity culture in digital mental health, and we're already a culture of safeguarding and protecting health. So it's almost like part of the culture is there, and we can start to see the safeguarding, the protecting from a different perspective. So I really hope that after the conference, there's going to be some really great things to come. But it is mental health data. I argue that it's the most sensitive data on the planet. So we need to be at the forefront of keeping it safe. So, but it's experts like yourself and reaching out to the broader community to work with us it's going to be really important for us. So I just wanted to conclude by thanking you. And it was just really wonderful to have a conversation. And thank you for sharing all of your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you.